recording this. Okay, so I turned on the recording, and it's Wednesday. Let's talk about the next steps for Project 4. Let's see, hopefully I'm sharing my desktop. You can see Chrome here and then Photoshop in the background, I hope. It never really shows me sometimes what's outlined and what's actually being shared, but I just want to make sure. And I also wanted to bring up the chat box, which has disappeared for some reason. Oh, there it is. Yes, I can see that. Okay, great. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. When we last left off, let's see, yesterday we did a few things. We brought in our base drawing from Illustrator with lines and the rendering sort of superimposed. So we export as a PNG file with a transparent sky that we brought into Photoshop. We actually added our own sky. By copy and pasting, we use the Polygonal Lasso tool to start to select various portions and shapes in our scene here, and then use the paintbrush tool to begin to fill in, let's say, the poche for things that are being cut, ground, mullions, walls, floors, etc. So, and last but not least, we copied and pasted some scale figures, the vector scale figures from Illustrator, into Photoshop as raster images, right? So we resize some things and move them around the screen in order to set this scene kind of like the way it is. Here it was, right? So this is where I'll start today. But again, just to recap what we're going today is we are going to begin to assign some materials. We're going to map materials on, instead of mapping materials in the rendering, which can be a real pain. I'm going to do that after the fact here in Photoshop, and then we're going to add some wood pattern and some concrete pattern to some of these otherwise blank surfaces in our model. And then we're going to do some careful selecting around our model. What you'll find is that we're going to have to add things like trees, vegetation, ground, things like that, that looks like it's behind the building, but it'll actually have to sit above that base drawing layer. And so what we're going to do is we're going to select the building, and we're going to save that selection by making a selection path, and that way we can use it and continue to use it for clipping things out as we need. We'll apply that here at the very end by mapping a ground texture here. So I found like just a sort of green fuzzy ground texture. It's right here, and so we'll begin to apply that, and it's just meant to be like a, it's not great, but honestly, it's not too impressive. In fact, what you can see is that it looks flat. And then this horizon really breaks the illusion of anything, any reality that we thought we might have had. This horizon line, where the ground meets the sky, is always one of the big things that you have to sort of strategize about when you're composing things in Photoshop. And so, the way we're going to do it here, then, the last step tomorrow is to increase the density of vegetation there along that horizon line. So we just sort of mask it or hide it. Sometimes it's about putting buildings or terrain or something like that. And so we'll get there. So today it'll look like this, and you might look at it and go, oh, that's not so great, but we'll get there. We have to add entourage, trees, vegetation. We have to start to drop in shadows and things like that. We'll start to use more brushes and things like that tomorrow, okay? So this is where we're going today. And let's see here. Just turn some things off here. This is where I was. Let's see, save. Yeah, sure, I'll save it. Why not? All right, there's our ground covering. Just gonna try to move it over here. Maybe, no, maybe not. Okay, there we are. Screenshot. I also provided in Canvas this wood texture, like this sort of wood siding. And also this concrete texture, which is right here. Okay, great. All right, so let's start with the materials. And bear with me, my mouse just doesn't seem to want to work today, so I'm going to be using the touchpad, for better or worse. So first I'm going to go to this concrete image, right? This is just a JPEG I found online of concrete texture. You can always look up these things in Google Images. If you look up, let's say, concrete texture, ground texture, skies, or high-res skies, or something like that, then go to the images, Google image search. You can set the settings to only find large images. You can even specify a minimum size if you need to. And then you can download them and then use them. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this whole thing. You know, again, I could use the rectangular selection tool and just drag. If I'm just interested in copying the whole document, I can just hit Control A. That's for like select all, Control all. Okay, Control A, then Control C to copy. And then I can go to this setting I have, the scene, and I can hit Control V, paste. Okay, there it is. I pasted that in. It's pasted on, in this case, a new layer called Layer 1. Okay, let me go ahead and double click on the Layer 1 label. And I'm going to add a label here like concrete texture, something like that. Okay, that way I remember what this is. I can go ahead and move it. What you'll find is if you try to click and drag this and you accidentally click and drag something else, that could be really annoying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the other layers that I don't actually want to mess with or accidentally drag away or anything. I'm going to select them. I'm just going to hit this lock key, this lock icon, which will lock these other layers. Okay, so I've locked so I don't accidentally drag a person off in the middle of space or move my base drawing away from the sky or whatever it is, right? I just want to keep everything in place, except for this concrete texture. That's what I'm going to work with here. Let me go ahead and position this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to map it on this wall. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of put it in place. Another thing you notice is that this is opaque. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this layer, and inside the layers box, I can look at the opacity of the layer and I can change it. I'm just going to turn it down temporarily. I'm not going to leave it this transparent. I just want to be able to see what's behind it, so I can resize this thing appropriately. I'm going to go ahead and go to the Edit Transform tools. Okay, Scale. Remember, I talked about this yesterday when we were moving and scaling people. Okay, Edit, pull down, Transform, Scale. And I'm just going to, you know, sort of resize this so that I get as much of it in and around this wall that I'm going to use as possible. And I'm going to have to do this up here as well, I think. All right, so now you can see I have this concrete texture. I just want to map it on this wall, and so I actually overlap and go past the wall. Like I'm not sort of coloring inside the lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the use the polygonal lasso tool like we did yesterday, and go around the outline of this. Okay, and then I'm going to delete the stuff that's outside of it. All right, so polygonal lasso tool over here, and that lets me, again, just quick rehash here. It lets me select go around and draw specific selection shapes, selection areas that don't necessarily conform with rectangles or circles. Okay, so there's part of that wall, right? And now here's what's interesting. If I start a new one, I'll take this one away. So I don't want to do that. I want to go ahead and say add to selection. So there's several different ways you can think about this. If you have a selection here and you want to keep selecting more areas, you can add to the selection. If you accidentally messed up and you selected more than you need to, you could always subtract from the selection, and so on and so forth. So I'll just make sure this is set to add selection so I can start to go around and continue to select portions of this model. Just going to go around. I would zoom in. If I was being really careful like you guys are going to be, I'd be super careful here. Make sure that I'm snapping in just the right places here. Now, what's interesting is that Photoshop doesn't know a line from a, you know, these are all just pixels assigned a certain color. So when I say a snap, there are no real snaps in Photoshop like we're used to with Illustrator and Rhino and those sorts of things. So I'm just going to go around, and I'm sort of freehanding it here, but I'm trying to be as careful as possible. Just going around and selecting the portions that I want to keep this concrete fill with. Just going to go around. Oh, need to go just a little over. There we go. All right, and when I get close to the end, where I originally started, you'll see the cursor will have a little circle next to it. There we go. So I've closed that area as well. Okay. So I've selected this as well as everything inside of this shape. Right? I'm going to zoom out. But what's interesting is I want to delete everything that's outside of those shapes, right? So I want to delete everything on this concrete texture layer that's outside of these shapes. So I've selected basically the reverse of what I need. So when that happens, okay, because it's easier to select just these shapes, I can go to Select, pull down, and I can invert the selection, okay? So everything that was selected will be deselected. Everything that was not selected will be selected now, right? So now it's selected all the outside areas. And again, now with the concrete texture layer on, I can just hit delete or backspace or whatever key you use to delete things. And now I've deleted all the concrete texture within the sort of active selection area, right? Cool, cool. Okay, now I took this concrete, the opacity of this concrete layer all the way down to like 40-some%. I'm just gonna up it the opacity to 100 again. And like I said, this doesn't look too realistic. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna make this an overlay layer. So it's gonna kind of a special layer that'll look at what's below it, and it'll apply this texture to the things that are below it. So we'll still see, let me just show you what happens when I do this. I'll try overlay, right? Sometimes you can use different overlay layers like multiply, and go through, okay. But what I wanna do is I still wanna see through this layer, see the texture, but have the texture of the layer, the concrete texture layer applied to the base drawing below it, right? So I still see the soft shadows and the edges and things like that. So I get the best of both here, right? By making this an overlay layer. In this case, I picked multiply, right? Which is a one type. You could go through and decide on these, right? Some brighten them up, some darken them up, some just add contrast. Some are more subtle and some are less subtle than others, right? So you just want to be very careful. But I like that multiply, it looks nice. All right. There's a concrete texture. So what we did is we put the concrete texture in the right place. We turned down the opacity just so we could resize and clip and trim things around. Then when we were done, we had everything looking correct. We upped the opacity again, and then we set this to be a sort of overlay layer, right? And so we can do the same thing with other patterns and textures as well. Now I said up here I need to add more concrete texture up here because this is a continuation of this. This up here is a continuation of this wall. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit. I'm going to again go back to my concrete image, copy, make sure that's copied and paste again. And I'm just going to do this one more time here, right, for you, but I'll do it in a different place. I'm just going to turn down the opacity a little bit. Try to resize this. I don't want to go too drastic. I don't want the density to be different than the one below it, right? I want it sort of things to be, more or less close. I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool, and not sure why, except I have some kind of screwy line work here in my section. I should have been more careful in Illustrator before I exported it out. But I've gone ahead and selected that shape. Okay. And now I'm going to go to, I've selected everything inside the shape. What I really want to do is select everything outside the shape. So I'm going to go to Select, pull down, Invert Selection, Inverse. Okay. That'll select everything on the outside. What you'll see is when I zoom out, I have basically the whole image selected, and then there's an island of non-selected stuff right here, right? So I'm going to make sure that this layer is the one that's active, and then hit delete. Right? Now I've trimmed it out. Okay. Now with this layer, I'm just going to turn the opacity back up, and I'll make it the same type of overlay layer as before, right? Make sure that layer is selected. Instead of normal, I'm going to go with multiply, right? Now we have some concrete walls, right, to go along with our aluminum panels and mullioned curtain wall or whatever. Okay. All right. So that's one way of doing this. Now you'll notice that all of these things, as I start to copy and paste things in, are all in different layers. Once I'm done, I'm really confident that all of these concrete layers are going to stay, and I don't need to mess around with them independently. I can select them all at once by holding down the Shift button and selecting more than one. And I can right click and I can just say merge all of the ones that are selected into one layer. So now I have all of these selected as a concrete texture. For whatever reason, it took away the type of overlay layer it was. So I'm just turn that back to multiply. There we go. Okay. So again, I have people layer. I have concrete layer. The concrete layer should go underneath the people layer. There we go. And I have the poche layer. That's important. I'm going to move the poche layer above the concrete layer. So it's always about keeping track of these things, making sure that they're labeled, making sure that things are above other things, you know, in the way most appropriate for how you stack or layer up this collage. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and save. I've done a concrete texture, and that's kind of easy because it, you know, it doesn't have a lines or a grid or anything to it, so we don't really have to worry too much about perspective with it. But now look at this wood paneling pattern. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Sorry, so Control A to select the whole thing, right? Control C to copy. Control V to paste this in. Okay, it's on another new layer called Layer 1. I'm going to move that upwards in the hierarchy here, and I'm going to make sure that I have this cursor selected so I can move this around. Concrete texture, I'm going to go ahead and lock that layer as well so I don't move that around. Now, obviously, I'm going to have to resize this thing and do a bunch of stuff to this. Okay, so we're going to use more of our edit, pull down, transform tools. We're going to use not only scale, but also distort and maybe even some rotate, things like that. Okay. All right, so first of all, I'm going to just turn down the opacity so I can see beyond it a little bit. Okay. That way I can sort of see what I'm aiming for here. And what I'm going to do, I picked something that would deliberately be sort of difficult so I could show you guys how this stuff works. But I'm going to map it onto this face, and so have the main direction of this wood siding moving vertically along this face, then turn a corner and move horizontally along the bottom side of this face, and then turn again to go up the vertical, just this part. So it looks like there's wood sort of wrapping around this wall and these planes. Okay. All right. So one of the things I first need to do is scale this and then rotate it around 90 degrees. Okay. I'm going to go to Edit, Pull Down, Transform, and I'll just pick Scale. I'm going to scale it a little bit here. I'm going to Edit, again, Transform. I can go to Rotate. I can rotate it freely. If I hold down the Shift button, I can rotate it in 15-degree increments all the way just to make a perfect 90 degree. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move this and sort of try to better understand what I need to do here. Okay, I need to scale it back just a little bit, just a little bigger now. I scaled it down just a little too much. Edit, pull down, transform, scale. That's where all those transform tools are. Okay. And really, there's a shortcut where you can hit Command Control T, right, to bring up the scale and the rotate. But we're going to be using things other than the scale and rotate as well. So I just wanted to make sure you guys know where those are. All right. So speaking of, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'm going to transform, and I'm going to go to distort. Okay. What's interesting is this will give us these handles along the corners and edges again. And what I can do is I can begin to distort this to match our perspective. Ah, it's like magic. Again, I just want to make sure I've got this in the right place here. There we are. There. And that's going to become an overlay layer as well in some way, shape, or form. I can do the darken or multiply, but in this case, I think I'm just going to pick maybe overlay. Let's see, just go through real quick. Ugh. Some of these are better than others. I'll just pick overlay for now. All right. Again, you know, you can also take this layer and you could go to the adjustments. Remember, we did some things with hue and saturation yesterday. Brings up this box. I could try to add more color to this, or conversely, try to like sort of desaturate it and pull out the color so it, you know, starts to recede to gray. I'm just going to make it just pop a little more, right, with a little bit of a little bit more color. So we get a little more orange in here for the brown. So it pops out a little more. All right, let's try this again. I'm gonna do this underside here. So let's see here. I'm gonna go ahead and copy and paste this in again. Ta-da. I'm gonna have to scale. This time I'm just gonna hit Control T to bring up the scale transform tool here. And clearly I have a ways to go here. I'm gonna go ahead and try to scale this as much as I can here. I'm gonna hit enter. I'm gonna turn down its opacity so I can see what I'm doing again. I'm just gonna zoom in so I can get a little closer view here. All right. Now, again, I'm gonna go to the transform tools and pick distort. It's gonna give me these handles and I can make this thing, hopefully, maybe not too artfully, but we'll see. Extend outwards. The reason I have to do this here is because there's a portion of it that we'll see here, but then I'll have to clip out this part, right? And so I'm just gonna go ahead and hit OK. It doesn't look so bad. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for an in-class demo over Zoom. I'm just gonna go ahead around and select the area that I want to delete. This all the sort of area that's around, that's outside the lines. I'm gonna go ahead and hit delete. There, all right. Now I wanna make sure that that's an overlay layer. So I'll go ahead and select that as overlay. All right, one more time. I need to put a little bit of it here. You know, I could probably just take a sample portion of this and just move it up here. So let's just try that. All right. I'm just going to take a portion of, I think it's this one, layer 1. Okay, so I'm gonna make sure I select the right layer. I'm just gonna select a portion of it, copy, okay, and then paste, right? There it is, leave, right? And so now I need to, let's see here, adjust the opacity of this thing. There we are. And I'm just gonna zoom in a little more even. And let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and go to the edit, transform tool, distort. Let's see what happens here. Obviously, we don't want to stretch it that much. We're going to get some pixelation. So there we go. All right, I'm going to turn that opacity back up. I'm going to set it to overlay. With this one, I'm going to make sure that opacity set back, set to overlay. Now that I have this wood mapped, I have it on 3 different layers because I've copied and pasted 3 different sort of times here. So I'm going to select all of those at once, holding the Shift key. Right click, and I'm just going to merge those layers. I'll call this wood texture. It's set the file or the layer type back to normal, which is really odd looking. I'm just going to set that to overlay again, and I'll put this down here underneath the poche. There we are. All right. Okay, so we've added some wood texture. We've added some concrete texture. You know, your model is going to be different, and so you know, I think it's key for you to practice this and go through the motions and try this out. It's not always going to be perfect, but you know, the more practice you get, the better you get. It's like painting or drawing or anything else, right? In order to develop skill with things, you have to practice, right? That works with any tool, right? Can I apply the texture to a wall with reveals? I wouldn't, because the reveals wall tends to sort of say like, okay, this is aluminum panel. So you wouldn't have reveals like that for concrete or for wood, right? And the wood wouldn't match up with it. So what I would do is I would leave that, the reveals one as is, and then apply these textures to some of the blank walls that you have, right? Yeah, thanks, Juan. Good question, by the way. All right, so just want to make sure we, you know, talked about everything here. Is there anything I missed? I don't think so. Distort's that really nice transform tool that you need when you're trying to conform something to the perspective, right? And so that's, I want to make sure you guys saw that, and we went over it. Let's see. So we're going to map ground texture on. Again, this looks really cheesy right now. We'll try to make it look better here in a bit, you know, tomorrow. But what I want to do is we're going to go over more copy and paste and more trimming and things like that. But this time we're going to have to trim stuff that so we're going to put, like, you know, a big piece of ground here, and then we're going to have to trim out the building portion of it, right? And so we're going to have to do that with trees. We're going to have to do that with vegetation. We're going to have to do that with some of the human scaled figures that we put in later on. We're going to have to do that with the ground cover. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make a selection around our entire building, and we're going to actually save that selection. So when I use this Polygonal Lasso tool, we'll be able to save it. And if we accidentally deselect the building again, we can always go back to our paths layer or our paths box and pull that selection back up, which is really handy because sometimes you go to the painstaking process of, like, selecting all of this all at once. And then you know, later on you need it again and again and again and again. You don't have to keep spending half an hour doing this. So just do it once, work smarter rather than harder. All right, so I think you'll see what I mean once we actually put the ground cover in. So I'm going to do that first. There's the concrete. I'll go ahead and turn that off right now on the wood. There's the ground cover, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just select all, Control A, copy, Control C, and then paste, Control V. There it is. And I'm going to put this up at this top layer. Let's see. I'll call this ground instead of layer 1, because layer 1's, who knows what that means. Let's see here. There we are. All right. So there's a couple of things I want to do here. First of all, I'm going to zoom out of my thing so I can make sure I see all the edges here. This ground cover is obviously way over. I mean, this is just meant to be kind of a texture. In fact, we'll try to break away from sort of seeing any kind of, like, grass or clover figures in here, but try to make it more of a pattern. I'm going to go ahead and scale it down and position it over here. I'm going to copy and then paste the scaled down version. And I'm just going to go around, and I'm just going to keep pasting versions of this, pasting more versions of this. We're just going to make a tile wallpaper. It's going to be pretty gross looking to start off with. Right? And let's see there. There we are. I'll just make sure I'm covering all of the white areas here that was originally ground. I'll even finish this out here real quick. All right, so I've pasted a bunch of these ground layers. I'm just going to select them all at the same time. Right, hold down that shift button, pick this one, and then pick this one with the shift button. It'll select everything, those two plus everything in between. I'm just going to right click and say merge layers. So now I have this as one layer, okay, rather than a bunch of layers. This wood texture, I'm going to go ahead and select that and lock it, so that I can just select the ground and not have to worry about messing something else up later. I'm going to turn down the opacity here. So there's a couple of things we need to do. First of all, we need to do some distort and scale and some trimming in order to make this thing sort of end where the sky begins, and end also where this where the pochette begins down here. In fact, we can actually move this ground, let's see, down a bit. There we go. And then we don't even have to worry about the pochette, because the pochette will cover this up, because the pochette is higher in our layer hierarchy, right? So I move this down like a piece of trace paper. I've moved it closer to the bottom. And so everything that's above it now shows up on top of it. All right, so there's the ground. But we also need to trim out this building, right? And we also need to trim out our ground, or our ground tile pavers here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select make a polygonal selection around, use the polygonal lasso tool to make a selection around my entire building, okay, including the windows, right, as holes within the selection. And I'll save that selection so I can keep coming back to it because you'll use it over and over and over again as we go through this, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and turn this ground layer off for a moment. And I'm just going to, let's see, if I can go to the polygonal lasso tool. You can hopefully see my cursor. I'm just gonna go around. I'm gonna start down here. And I'm actually gonna be a little more careful about, yeah, there we go. Make sure I'm staying like within whatever this width of this black line is. I'll zoom out. I'm aiming for up here, so I'll just zoom in, make sure I'm snapping to the correct place. This is where you want to be, you know, fairly careful because you do this once, and then you're going to use it over and over again. So you just want to make sure that it's perfect before you use it over and over and over again. You know, nothing worse than having to redo something, right? All right, just going around, selecting first the outside shape of my building, and then also the inside shape. You know, there are people on. I'm just going to, oh, that was unfortunate. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. No, I didn't really click there, did I? I might actually have to keep, oh no, I thought I could undo a click on this. All right, well, here, I'll hit escape and I'll start over, but I'll be quicker. But I'm just gonna turn the people off so I can see all the edges here. I'll turn that people layer off. I can always turn them back on. All right, sorry. So I'll be a little quicker here just for the sake of our demonstration, although you'll zoom in and be much more careful, I hope, because this is your work. Just gonna go around, hopefully select everything here. Normally I'd start to zoom in and out, make sure I got everything here. I don't want to bore you guys to death. Fortunately, your mics are muted, so I can't hear if you're snoring yet. But just going around. But again, I'm being very careful to select all the way around my building. Okay, all the way around this project you guys have put together, from a bunch of strange planes that were cut into shapes, then composed into some sort of spatial arrangement, then detailed in Revit, then drawn in isometric, then cut in plan, sliced in section, examined in elevation. Now we're gonna add some experiential stuff here. So just wanna, how can you pan around? I'm on a MacBook Pro, so I'm just using 2 fingers on my touchpad to move. But I believe if you hold down the space key on your keyboard, then it turns your cursor to the pan button temporarily. Good question. That's how I'm panning. Same with Illustrator. If you hold down that shift or the space key on your keyboard, you know, basically turns your cursor to a pan tool until you let off. Yeah, it's so helpful, isn't it? Like, right? How do you move around? Half of this is just learning the muscle memory and practice of like using this all the time, right? So I get it. Trust me, I've been there. Almost there. Yay. All right, I'm almost around. I just want to be very careful. Make sure I select all the edges. There we are. All right, there's that. And now what I need to do is I need to subtract from selection. I need to go in here and select, oops, select the holes in the selection. So I'm just going to go ahead and Try to select these, as well as this. All right. Cool. Now I have everything selected like this. Don't deselect anything, okay? Once it's perfect, I'm gonna see where my layers box is. There's a couple of tabs here, and one of them is called paths. I'm gonna go ahead and select paths. And I'm gonna say, I think it's this one, make work path from selection. Boom, right? That's gonna save that selection as a path, which is very handy. Let's see here. So now whenever I need to clip something, like let's say the ground, I can select this ground layer. I can go to the paths box and I can select this work path and I can say load path as a selection, and I've selected everything. Yay. So I can delete the grass, you know, or whatever this stuff is. This is just really crazy looking, creepy looking ground cover. As well, I can always go through and I can just double check. I'm just gonna trim this up at the horizon. Again, I have this grass layer selected. All right, grass layer selected. Go ahead and just trim that out a bit. Last but not least, and this is a lot easier to do, I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool. And I'm just going to go around the tile here. And I will trim out the grass from this area as well. So just go around, make a shape, and then delete the grass that's in there. Because we'll add a different color to this tile here in a bit. All right. In fact, if I didn't reselect that, I could actually add the color to that right now. Let's do that. Why not? I'm going to go ahead and add another layer. I'll call this one warm coloration for tile or pavers. Okay. And I'm going to pick a color here. Let's see. I'll use my paintbrush first of all. Paintbrush, brush tool. I'm going to pick a color. I can use any kind of color. Burnt orange or something, I don't know. I'm just going to go ahead and add this to this layer. You're going to go, whoa, what the crap did you just do, Vermilion? Don't worry. This is going to be an overlay layer. Let's see here. That might have been too bright of a color. So while everything's still selected, I'm just going to, wow, that was way too bright. What was I thinking? There we go. Just give it a little bit of warmth. All right, yeah, that's good. We'll make it an overlay layer so that we can see it, see the stuff behind. There we are. We need to trim out part of that. So I'll just go around and use the polygonal lasso tool, just trim that overlay layer that I made called warm coloration. Just get my lasso tool, and at this point, I'm really just sort of trimming some things out. Oop. Oh, I know. Here. Sorry, I'll just set this to the regular default selection tool settings here. Just go around. Da, 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 da. Here we are. All right. So there's that. Let's go back to the ground. I set that to be really opaque or really transparent. I'm going to up this. All right, we're going to do some things. First of all, you can see that there's some pretty unseemly tiling going on here. So we're going to use some clone stamp tool to try to fix some of that. As well, we're going to change the color and saturation and hue and color, you know, some of the things like this with this. We're going to make it more of a warm gold color. And so, or at least I'm going to. Let's see. So let's try that. First of all, let me go to image. Let's do the coloration first. Image adjustment, hue and saturation. Okay. Image pull down, adjustment, hue, saturation. I'll leave my cursor there for a minute. Later on when you're watching the video, that'll help. Okay. And I'm just going to say colorize. And I'm just going to turn it to, see, I click the colorize button. It's going to give it a sort of a nice warm gold, almost orange tint to it. Okay, there's the ground layer. The ground layer is also still selected. I'm going to go ahead and lock this tile layer here. Just lock that really quickly. Okay, make sure I'm selecting ground. I'm going to use the clone stamp tool. It's this one that looks like a sort of stamp, like a notary sort of stamp. Clone stamp. What I can do, okay, is I can select a size of a brush and type of a brush. I'm going to make sure that this is a round, sort of feathered brush. In other words, it has a soft edge to it, not a hard edge like this one, but a soft edge. I can adjust the size, okay, and I can also adjust the hardness. I'll just keep this kind of soft. And I'm going to move my cursor around. I'm going to hold, in my case, it's the Option key, I believe. Let's see here. Do I have ground selected? Yeah. The Option key, and I'm just going to select a portion of this. Oh, wait, sorry, I have the dodge. Oh, my bad. I need my, what happened here? Oh, clone stamp. I don't know why I moved away from clone stamp. Clone stamp, just want to adjust the size of my brush. Hardness, I'll just go up to like 20-some%. Okay, now with clone stamp on, this is the clone stamp icon. I can hold down my Option key and I can select a portion of my ground. And then after I let off the Option key, I can begin to try to blend certain things, right? And it all depends on where you're selecting to start with. But I just want to try to take out some of these, you know, obvious sort of seams here. I'm doing that with a feathered brush so that the edges are never really crisp. And I'll still have some repetition issues here. There's ways to get around that by maybe, you know, adding several different types of grass or ground covering patterns. I'm just going to go around and sort of make sure that there aren't any, like, you know, obvious like wallpaper seams here. Okay. Okay. So another couple of things we're going to do. Let's see, what else do we say? Make collapse and paths, make some ground textures. While I have this ground texture and the tile coloration stuff on, I'm going to unlock that. I have both of those. Let's add a little bit of nuance here. So for instance, if I turn off the ground, you'll notice that the ground cover that we just made, you notice that on the original drawing, the original model, sorry, let me turn off the clone stamp tool. We'll see like shadows and shading and things like that on the ground, that the building is casting a little bit of shadows here and there. And we're losing that once we cover this with ground. And we can always change the opacity down a little bit, you know, let's say. But one of the other things we can do is we can always just add that, paint those shadows in, particularly soft shadows. We can go to the dodge and burn tool. So the dodge tool, again, looks like a paintbrush, and you can lighten things up. Okay, I'll just undo that. And with the burn tool, it's like the opposite. You can darken things up. Right? And so with, let's say, the burn tool selected, I can click and hold and find the burn tool. I'll go ahead and change the size of my brush and the type of brush. Right? I'm just going to go ahead back here and start to give a little bit of, oh, that's set to highlights for some reason. Let's say to the midtones maybe. Just darken a few things up here. Sorry. This is where I like to have a nice mouse, but sadly it's not in the works today. All right. And later when we add trees and people, we can go back through and start to add shadows and more definition, start to break this sort of repeating pattern of whatever that was previously, whatever this image was, this one, right? Which seems pretty inconsequential now. This is just a quick ground texture. It's not the best, but we want to keep things simple for the first time, your first rodeo here, so to say. I'll go ahead and turn people back on. There we are. Right. Okay. Anything else at this point? We went over a little bit of dodge and burn. We'll start to map and draw and paint more shadows on as we go. Again, with the warm coloration, you know, I have these people here on the tile. You know, I could always, again, do the burn tool, just give them a little bit of shadow, just a little bit of presence and weight. Again, just giving them a little bit of you know, presence here on the plane that they're sitting in. Let's see, base drawing. You can always, oh, it's locked. Yeah, that makes sense. You can always try to do the same right there. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and save. Right. So tomorrow we're gonna add trees. Let's see what else. We're gonna fix the horizon. We're gonna add trees. We're gonna paint some soft shadows. Yeah, we're gonna add some colored tiles. We did that today. Yay! We can add some more stuff. We can add more people if we want. The trees, you know, if you want to work ahead, you know, they're kind of just like the humans, right? You can copy and paste them from that tree pack that I gave you from Illustrator. Copy and paste them in, resize them, position them around. We'll do some things with the eraser brush where we'll sort of soften the edges where the bottom edge of each tree, where it hits the ground, where it would potentially hit like, you know, rough terrain or vegetation. So it doesn't look like it's just a sort of flat copy and paste job. Again, we'll make sure that we're hiding this pretty inadequate horizon job right now. And so we'll use vegetation for that for this round. And when we put trees, then we'll start to actually map more shadows, paint more shadows onto the ground. Okay. And it'll probably look something close to like, at least mine will look something close to, I think, the example here, right? So like I said, we'll start to paint more shadows with the dodge and burn tools. We'll add more and more layers of vegetation. Maybe add some flying critters in the sky or something. We could always add a solar flare. That's one thing I didn't do here, I guess. Let's add a solar flare. Why not? Render. Oh, it's not gonna let me do it. Interesting. I'll figure that out for tomorrow, I guess. Oh, it's probably because the layer I'm using is locked. So that'll happen to you sometimes. You're like, why won't this work? No, not difference clouds. Whoa. Sky. Let's see. Let me bling it out a little bit. Let's see. Render lens flare. Let's see where this is going to be. Anyway, that's just silly at this point. All right, so without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording, leave the room really quickly so you guys can take a 5-minute break. I'll come right back. I just leave so I can get the video converting from Zoom. And then it's work session, Q&A. I can help out however I can. Right? Again, the idea is the first half of the class is demonstration. The second half is just sort of work session and troubleshooting and things like that. Okay, go ahead and